Okay, hi guys. This is our last set of notes for our last unit in Common Core Math 1. So yay, we've made it to the end. So today we are going to look at two-way tables. And before we do that, take a look at the picture on the front of this slide and jot down what you think it is. And we'll come back to that later in the video. Just jot down when you look at the picture, what is the first thing you see? And then write down what you see. Okay, we're going to take a look at this Venn diagram right here, and the data below is a survey of 50 students, and it's shown in this Venn diagram. The students were asked whether or not they were taking a foreign language and whether or not they played a sport. So foreign language is here in yellow, sport is here in blue, and then this intersection of the Venn diagram are students that take both, and then this one out here, the 3, is a student that does not take a foreign language and does not play a sport. So the first question we're going to look at is how many students are taking a foreign language. So we're looking at this yellow circle right here. So it's 24 plus 14. And that total, 24 plus 14, is 37. So 37 students are taking a foreign language. The second question we're going to look at from the Venn diagram is how many students play a sport. So we're looking at this circle in the Venn diagram. So 10 plus 14 is 24, and 24 students, that should be a 24, play a sport. Next question, how many students do both? So we're looking at the intersection, of that Venn diagram, and the intersection of that Venn diagram is right here, so 14 students do both. Question number 4, how many students do not play a sport and do not take a foreign language? So that means they cannot be in this circle or this circle. So we're looking at this number of students down here. So there are 3 students who do not play a sport or take a foreign language. And finally, question number 5, how many students play a sport but do not take a foreign language? So we're looking at play a sport, which is this section right here, but do not take a foreign language. And so we have to exclude that section right there, and so that leaves us with 10 students who play a sport but do not take a foreign language. So we're going to take that information from the Venn diagram and we are going to make a two-way table. And a two-way table is used to look at the relationship between two categorical variables, and it's similar to a Venn diagram. Instead of using circles, it's going to be we're going to make a table. And so a two-way table is going to do just that. So a two-way table has a column variable, and in this case we have two column variables. We have play a sport and do not play a sport. And then it also has a row variable. And our row variables are take a foreign language, do not take a foreign language. So we're going to use the Venn diagram to fill this out. Okay, so I've just imported the Venn diagram from above on your paper, and so we're going to fill out this two-way table with our column variables and our row variables using the Venn diagram above. So the first question is, if we look at this column, this is the play a sport column, and this row is take a foreign language. So in this section, we would put the number of students that play a sport and take a foreign language. And so that would be this intersection right there. So there are 14 students who play a sport and take a foreign language. So we'll continue with this column here. Here we need to write the number of students who play a sport that do not take a foreign language. So again, here's the play a sport. These people right here do not take a foreign language because they are not included in the intersection of those two circles, so that would be the number 10. So if we total up that column, how many students play a sport? It's a total of 24 students who play a sport. The second column, the variable we're looking at is do not play a sport. So students who do not play a sport and take a foreign language. So this would be the play a sport intersection, and these are the people who take a foreign language but do not play a sport. And so that number is 23. And then finally, students who do not play a sport and do not take a foreign language. So the people that are not included in these yellow and blue circles, so we're looking at this number down here, so there are 3. And then if we look at the total number of students who do not play a sport, that's 26. And if you remember in the original description of that Venn diagram, there was a total of 50 students that were surveyed, and 24 plus 16 equals 50. So the total of the rows, or the total of the columns, has to equal 50. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the total of the number of students who take a foreign language. So of the students who take a foreign language, 14 play a sport, 23 do not play a sport, so we have a total of 37 students who take a foreign language. And then do not take a foreign language, there are 10 that play a sport and 10 that do not, or 3, sorry, that do not play a sport, so we have a total of 13. And if we add up that column, we get a total of 50 students. So we're going to look at 2 types of frequencies in this chart right here. We have marginal frequencies, and the marginal frequencies are these numbers out here on the margin. So 24, 26, 37, and 13 are what we call marginal frequencies. So we're going to fill in that data. I can get rid of this guy right now, so I'm just going to put that over here. We're going to fill in that data using our two-way table. So we are talking about marginal frequencies because they're on the margin. And these frequencies are the totals of each individual category. So the total of the play a sport, do not play a sport categories, the take a foreign language, and do not take a foreign language categories. So if we look at our margin frequencies, how many students play a sport? 24. How many students do not play a sport? That would be 26. Students that take a foreign language is 37. And students who do not take a foreign language is 13. So we also have other types of frequencies. These on the margins, the totals, are called marginal frequencies, and these are called joint frequencies, and we're going to take a look at that on the next page. So joint frequencies are the values that join the 2 variables together. So these are called joint frequencies. And let's take a look at that two-way table from the previous page. Let me import that. Okay, so we're going to use the two-way frequency table to look at our joint frequencies. And again, they're the values that join the 2 variables together. And we're going to use our table to fill in the joint frequencies. So here's our table from the other page. I'm just going to put it down here for a second. We're going to use that table to find out how many students play a sport and take a foreign language. So here's our play a sport category and take a foreign language, so that joint frequency is 14. So the number of students that play a sport and take a foreign language is 14. Second one, students who play a sport but do not take a foreign language. So again, here's our play a sport. How many do not take a foreign language? And that is 10. The next one, the students who do not play a sport, so we're looking in this category right here, but take a foreign language. So do not play a sport and take a foreign language is 23. And finally, our last joint frequency, students that neither play a sport or take a foreign language. So how many students don't do any of this? That would be 3, which is this number right here, and that's our joint frequencies. So we can also create a table using these frequencies, and we call it a relative frequency table. So I'm going to get rid of this guy, put him up there. Okay. So the table we created uses frequencies, and again, these are the joint frequencies right here. And some people better understand data if it's displayed as a percent. So if it's displayed as a percent, we call this a relative frequency table. And the relative frequency table is found by dividing the frequency in the overall total. So let's go back to our diagram, our frequency table up here. I've got some numbers messed up there, but that's okay. So to do our relative frequency table, so students who play a sport and take a foreign language. So we know that the number of students surveyed was 50, and of those 50, 14 take a sport, play a sport and take a foreign language. So that would be 14 out of 50, which is 28%. So now we want play a sport and do not take a foreign language. Okay, and again, it's out of 50, and that was 10 out of 50, which is 20%. And then if we do a total, the percentage of students who play a sport, again, it's out of 50, and that's 24. Where do we get the 24 from? 14 plus 10 is 24, and that as a percent is 48%. So I'm going to pause the video and give you a second to fill in the rest of the table. Go ahead and check your answers for the, sorry I'm messing up on this, for the relative frequency table. So 23 out of 50 do not play a sport and take a foreign language, that's 46%. 3 out of 50 do neither, they don't play a sport and they don't take a foreign language, that's 6%. And then 26 out of 50 do not play a sport. And if we add 23 and 3, that's where we get the 26, and then 46 and 6 is 52%. And then for our totals, 74% take a foreign language, 26% do not take a foreign language, 48% of students surveyed play a sport, 52% of students surveyed do not play a sport. And again, this has to equal 100%. Okay, so we're going to use that relative frequency table to answer the questions on the bottom. So just give me a second and I'm going to fill in that data for you. Data from the table that we just did a few minutes ago, I just rewrote it a little neater. So we're going to answer the following questions based on the previous table. So question number 1 is asking, what percent of students play a sport but do not take a foreign language? So play a sport but do not take a foreign language. So that would be this box right here, because these students play a sport but do not take a foreign language, and so that would be 20%. Number 2, what percent of students do not play a sport or take a foreign language? So we're looking at students that don't do either, and that is this box right here, because they do not play a sport or take a foreign language, and that is 6%. Question 3, what percent of students take a foreign language but do not play a sport? So take a foreign language but do not play a sport, and that's this box right here, and that's 46%. And finally, the last one on the first row, what percent of students play a sport and take a foreign language? So play a sport and take a foreign language is 28%. That's this box right here at 28%. Okay, the next set of questions are a little bit tricky. So if we look at this first question, it says what percent of students who play a sport. So we're just looking at the students who play a sport. And how many students play a sport? If we look at our previous column, is 24 students play a sport. Of those 24 students, how many of those students also take a foreign language? So going back and looking at our previous table, our two-way table, of those 24, 14 take a foreign language. And so if we convert that to a percent, it's about 58.3%. And this is where it differs, because here it's asking you what percent of students who play a sport. So we're just looking at the number of students who play a sport, as opposed to this one, it says what percent of students, and they're talking about students in general, and this one's talking about students who play a sport. So this is talking about the entire population, this is talking about just the students who play a sport. So if we look at this question as well, what percent of students who don't play a sport? So what percent of the students who don't play a sport? Well, how many students don't play a sport? And the number of students that don't play a sport were 26, and we got that from the two-way table before. Of those 26, how many do not take a foreign language? And that number is 3. And so if we change that to percent, we get about 11.5%. Next question, and again we're looking at a different population. It says, what percent of students who take a foreign language? So we're just looking at what percent of the total number of students who take a foreign language, and there's 37 students who take a foreign language. And of those, how many also play a sport? And that's 14. Change that to a percent, and we get 37.8%. And then finally, what percent of students who don't take a foreign language? So how many students take a foreign language? Or who don't take a foreign language? There are 13. And of those, how many play a sport? That's 10. And we get a percentage of 76.9%. So let's take a look real quick at that two-way frequency table from before. Okay, so going back over these questions down here, if we're looking at the percent of students who don't play a sport, and who don't play a sport are 26. The number of students who play a sport are 24, so it's asking the percent of this number for this first question. The second question is asking what percent of this number also don't take a foreign language. This is asking what percent of this number, which is students who take a foreign language, also play a sport. And this one is asking what percent of students who. And who is that operative word? That's the one you want to look for to determine, are you using the 50 to determine your percent, or are you using the total for the individual categories to look at the percent. Okay, finally it's your turn for multiple choice question number 1. At a wedding reception, the guests have a dinner choice of chicken or steak. Do more people prefer chicken or steak? Do more people under 40 prefer chicken or steak? So you're answering 2 questions. Do more people prefer chicken or steak? And the second part of that question is, do more people under 40 prefer chicken or steak? So you're going to look at this two-way table to answer your questions. And this two-way frequency table right here, we don't is asking, is looking at people who watch a halftime show, and they looked at 2 age groups. They looked at the halftime show, football game, socialize with friends, and they looked at 2 age groups. And you're looking to find out how many more people surveyed prefer the football game to the halftime show. So how many more people surveyed, so how many were surveyed prefer the football game to the halftime show. And you can record those answers on your note sheet. Okay, and to refer back to the image at the front on the first slide of the video, we're going to make a two-way frequency table with that data, because some people, there's 2 images that people see, and we'll talk about what those 2 images are, and we're going to narrow those categories. We'll have image 1 and image 2, what people see, and then we'll have a row category for boys and girls, and we'll take a look at a two-way frequency table for that data. Have a good night.